Hi, my name is Patrick Keyes, and I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Atmospheric Science at Colorado State University. And today I'm going to talk to you about unsustainability in the Anthropocene, and we're going to cover kind of a lot of territory. So let's get going. So quick summary, Anthropocene risk means we cannot use the past to effectively understand the future. The near future will be turbulent no matter how humanity chooses to act. And unsustainability is going to create some unexpected challenges. So first off, the Anthropocene, what is that? It's this time that we're in right now. It's where humanity has unequivocally become a planetary force, changing the climate, the geochemistry of the oceans, the biodiversity in our world. Over the next 30 years, global climate will be pushed outside of humanity's evolutionary experience, conditions that humanity has more or less no experience with, let alone civilization. Humanity's critical ecosystem services are directly threatened by these changes. And as far as people are concerned, these changes will be permanent. We're not going back. At least, I don't think anybody has any possible idea of how we could go back across all of these different changes. The late Will Steffen now has neatly condensed this information effectively. We have more or less social aspects of these changes on the left and geophysical, ecological changes on the right. And if you squint, the take home here is that so many different aspects of our world are going up, and not just going up, they're going up in nonlinear ways with accelerating rates of change. So Anthropocene challenges emerge out of this. What are those? Well, examples of geophysical challenges. Here we've got wildfire in Australia and permafrost melt-driven landslides in Alaska. These are kind of geophysical changes that we're witnessing in real time. Another way to think about Anthropocene challenges are the direct threats to people's livelihoods. There's their ways of life, their cultural heritages. So on the top, we have a demonstrator at the Dakota Access Pipeline protests. And in the bottom, we have a direct action to shut down one of the largest open pit coal mines in the world. And lastly, we can also think about Anthropocene challenges as characterized by growing economic inequality. This is a hallmark of some of the changes that we've seen, as well as one of the underlying drivers of a lot of these changes. And this is for the United States, so we can see accumulation of wealth at the very top, as well as unequal accumulation of wealth among races in the United States. So because of this, myself and colleagues tried to develop a new way of thinking about some of these questions. We have this paper that was published a few years ago now called Anthropocene Risk. And Anthropocene risks are characterized by three things. First, anthropogenic changes in the Earth system, globally intertwined social ecological systems, and complex cross-scale interactions. Let's have an example of that. We can think about an anthropogenic change, so people encroaching further and further into domains of zoonotic illness vectors and diseases. Here we have a wet market this is in Shenzhen, China. And very quickly, diseases that are picked up in places like wet markets, but they can be other places, can travel very quickly around the world in a matter of days and weeks, leading to bare shelves on grocery store aisles around the world. So what could be a small single, if not very few events of illnesses crossing over from animals to people can spread around the world and lead to juddering halts for the global economy for many years. Sadly, we should expect more of these types of phenomena because we're continuing to do all of the same things. So today I'm going to give, there are four examples covered in the paper, and today I'm just going to cover two of those. First, aquaculture degradation and stranded assets and sea level rise. So first off, aquaculture is the practice of transforming coastal ecosystems into systems that can essentially provide aquatic agricultures. That can be shrimp farming, fish farming, etc. And this is a huge global commodity, and it's part of global supply chains. And often what will happen is private capital, usually external to a country, will incentivize the transformation of an ecosystem. And in this case, we can see what looks like an intact mangrove ecosystem in coastal Vietnam to a aquaculture system in coastal Vietnam. The challenge is that All it takes is a substantial hazard locally to potentially knock this out temporarily, which interrupts the global supply chain, and then global capital can say, you know what, we're going to go somewhere else. And so they might go somewhere else, possibly to Africa, or another coastal ecosystem that has cheaper labor, cheaper resources, fewer environmental regulations, all of the above. And it's almost impossible to go back to this type of ecosystem, at least on timescales that people care about. To transform back can be very difficult. So what does this mean globally for the social ecological systems that are transformed, including the people that live there? Another example of an Anthropocene risk is sea level rise and urban transformation. A question people might say is, well, why do we care about sea level rise? 50 years from now, 100 years from now, people will adapt. The reality is that cities tend to stick around. This is just a handful of coastal cities that are more or less in the same locations that they were hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. This is an example of a seawall in Jakarta. Jakarta itself is experiencing dramatic sea level rise for a whole number of reasons, including groundwater extraction, which has led to profound subsidence. But the fact is that Jakarta is sinking, and its government is actually, the Indonesian government is actually looking to relocate many of the functions of the capital. But sea level rise isn't going to stop at these convenient time horizons of 50 years from now, 100 years from now. If we look out to 2200, we'll see that sea level rise, even on really modest rates, is going to be at least a meter, probably multiple meters. And if things are quite dire, or we don't understand the ice sheet dynamics, et cetera, like we think we do, it will be many meters of sea level rise by the end of 2200. This is a huge problem. Infrastructure, especially civil infrastructure in urban environments, coastal environments, is designed to last. It's built to last. It's not built to be picked up and moved every 25 years as we have a new coastline. This is a big problem. So the question is, are we moving toward a sustainable world? And I think the answer is a resounding no. We have examples and isolated cases of progress being made on specific issues, but overall, the answer is no. One way to think about the challenges and to organize some of these issues, we can think about the external areas, these Anthropocene challenges of changing the geophysical systems of our Earth, climate change, ocean acidification. We can also think about how there are vast numbers of people that don't even have a baseline quality of life. They don't have a fair, equitable, good existence on this Earth. And so we're rightly trying to lift up that social foundation without going past these boundaries. We're going to come back to that in a second. In the midst of this, we've got the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 interlocking goals that every country on Earth is trying to achieve. But we don't have a sense of what the end game is here. What are we actually trying to get to? What's the target? We've got individual goals for these different points, but we're not necessarily thinking about where does this get us? If everybody achieves all of these, what happens? And another, I would argue, more important challenge is that there has not been enough accountability for the rich and powerful world. There is one SDG that's really targeted at things that the rich and powerful world are doing to transform the Earth, and that's responsible consumption and production. An enormous challenge for global development is that we have no examples of economic development, international development out there that do not compromise the integrity of the Earth system. Every country that has managed to achieve a high social foundation has done so by blowing past all of these biophysical and geophysical limits to the Earth system. Vietnam is shown here as a possible example, but now this is from 2018. The most recent data shows that no, it has actually blown past a lot of these biophysical boundaries. A good life for all requires radical transformation of all sectors of society. And we're not necessarily doing that right now, but we can entertain the possibility of maybe we could try that. And if we did try and do that, we would have an utter transformation of our society, which would lead to transition risks as we move to a low carbon society. And if we don't, then we're going to have other sorts of turbulence because of geophysical changes. An enormous issue here with turbulence is that we don't know where we are. We don't have the kind of proprioception to anticipate where are we. So we might be right at the brink right now. The author William Gibson has articulated this idea as the jackpot. It's the mundane cataclysm of modernity itself. It is hundreds of millions of people driving to the supermarket in their SUVs, flying 6 times a year, and eating medicated animals for dessert. For dinner, I should say, not dessert. If the jackpot is going to happen, Gibson says, it's already happening, and it's been happening for at least 100 years. He's describing this time that we're in. Some people have also called it a discontinuity. It's a break between our past and our future. We are linear organisms. We want to think about change being incremental in time and space, but that is not where we are right now. Anthropocene surprises will render many aspects of our future uninterpretable based on past experience. And we are likely already in the midst of one of these transformations. So we might be here because we don't know where we are, or we might actually be already falling because we don't have the tools to make sense, to sense make of this time that we're in. Another thing to think about is that we have this sense that if we achieve the Paris goals, then we will hold the global temperature to 1.5 degrees. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest that there's a much wider range of possibilities out there across Earth system modeling that simulates these emissions trajectories. So for example, if we continue on the ambitions that we're on right now, a large number, a fraction of the possible futures are going to be those that are 2 to 3 degrees Celsius warmer by the end of the century, possibly 3 to 4 degrees, possibly more than 4 degrees Celsius. Even if we have increased ambitions to achieve the Paris goals, a very large number of our possible futures are well above 1.5 or even 2 degrees C. We have to realize that our trajectories have a certain amount of unexpectedness baked into them. Another key issue is that while we have these ambitious goals, which we absolutely need to be working towards, sustainability goals, emissions reductions goals, I should say, we also need to look more clearly at where we are actually headed. Many recent updates to the original limits to growth work, which was published about 50 years ago, many of those recent updates have found very similar things and using entirely different approaches to modeling, that we are headed for some sort of, I don't know what you want to call it. I won't call it a collapse, but we're headed towards some sort of break in our ability as a planet, as a society, to cope with the overshoot of our pollution, the exhaustion of certain types of resources, the extermination of biodiversity on this planet. We're not looking clearly at that trajectory, or as clearly as I think we need to be looking at that trajectory. And because of that, I think we need to tune our radars, tune our sense-making tools, our anticipatory and awareness tools to think about things that we've never seen before. Some of those could be exotic non-solutions. So I have geoengineering listed here. There's a lot of emphasis right now to understand what the consequences of geoengineering could be. Not to do it, but because others might try it. And we don't know what those consequences could be for food production, for governance, for crises, for conflict. And this is an area where we have very little anticipatory capacity because we just don't understand what would happen, what would lead it to happen, or what would the consequences be if it were to happen from an actor somewhere on the planet. Another thing we need to be aware of is increasing desperation for change. The transformations on this planet, not just temperature changes, deprivation, growing inequality, are increasingly intolerable. When does push come to shove? And when do we need to, what can we do to be aware of where this is most acute? Lastly, we have to be aware of fascism masquerading as pragmatism. You can call it, it's been called lifeboat ethics. This idea that, well, it's too bad that those people over there don't have enough resources, don't have enough food. We just, we have to look out for ourselves at this point. I don't think that's good enough. As a scientist, as a researcher, as a person on this planet, I don't think that's good enough. So we need to do a better job of thinking through and being attuned to those sorts of arguments. So final thoughts. An Anthropocene risk mindset acknowledges turbulence, the turbulence that we're in and the turbulence to which we're headed, no matter what we do. Even if we get everything right from a decarbonization perspective, we will see things that we've never seen before as a planet and as a people. We must clearly envision a transformed civilization to effectively navigate this future. We're not doing that right now. We need to do a better job of thinking about articulating what does a transformed reality actually look like. And the pathway from here to there is going to be bumpy. What do those bumps look like? And lastly, given this inevitable turbulence, unsustainability will give rise to new challenges. So this idea that we're going to see things that we've never seen before in terms of attempts to solve problems that might not actually be very good solutions in the first place. We're going to see things that can't come from the past in terms of fascism and other sorts of political forms that will have resurgent popularity. We need to be aware of these potential changes. And with that, thank you so much. And please reach out to me. I would love to hear from you. There's just a handful of ways to get in touch. Thanks a lot.